A bullet pierces the silence of the desert, revealing secrets buried in the sand. In the clash between ambition and honor, a solitary marshal and a courageous botanist discover their destinies are intertwined by something deeper than the land they defend. A story of justice, redemption, and a love that blooms in the most arid conditions. Prepare for a journey that will make your heart ride like the west wind. Subscribe, leave your like, and comment from where you're watching this saga. At the break of dawn, when the wind whispered forgotten promises across the dunes and dust rose in lazy swirls, the small community of Dry Gulch awoke under the relentless gaze of a sun that seemed determined to drain the last drop of life from the earth. It was a place born of stubbornness and necessity, where water was more valuable than gold, and hope, an even rarer commodity. Michael, the marshal of Dry Gulch, watched the morning paint the horizon in shades of orange and red from the high porch of the sheriff's office. His blue eyes, weathered by time and solitude, swept across the main dirt street. He saw the trading post open its creaking doors, smelled the scent of strong coffee mixed with the fine dust that infiltrated everything. For 30 years, the badge on his chest was his only constant companion, the shield that separated him from the world, and the memories he preferred to keep buried. He remembered choosing this life, the life of law in inhospitable lands, abandoning the family farm, the promise of a simpler life, and worse, the bond with his younger brother Benedict. Guilt was a silent animal that gnawed from within, a burden he carried as naturally as the holster on his hip. He was a man of routines. He woke before the sun, watered his small garden of medicinal herbs, wild chamomile, thorny rue, prairie, grass, an unexpected patch of green in that sea of brown and ochre. Then he swept the sheriff's office, brewed his bitter coffee, and sat on the porch watching. Watching was his trade, watching the saloon, the sparse movement, the tense faces of the settlers struggling to scrape a living from the ungrateful land. He knew who was too quiet, who was drinking more than usual, who carried worries on their stooped shoulders. The arrival of the stagecoach was always an event, a fragile link to the outside world that brought not only essential supplies and mail, but also news, new faces, and occasionally trouble. That day, the stagecoach stopped with a sigh of tired brakes and a cloud of dust. Two figures descended. The first, a man of ordinary appearance with calloused hands and a too-ready smile, who introduced himself as Elias, a tool merchant from the south, interested in establishing business in the region. His conversation was easy, full of details, about distant cities, and he quickly won the sympathy of Joseph, the owner of the saloon The Last Drop, who saw in Elias's arrival the promise of some vitality for the settlement. Michael watched Elias descend, his scrutinizing eyes noting the slight, almost imperceptible hesitation before the man stepped onto the dirt ground, as if he wasn't used to it. The second figure who descended from the stagecoach made the few present stop what they were doing. It was a woman, but not a woman often seen in those parts. She wore practical travel clothes, but her bearing was elegant, and her eyes, a vibrant green, seemed to absorb every detail of the surroundings with curious intensity. She descended with 3 heavy leather suitcases, which contained more than just clothes. They were work tools, thick notebooks for annotations, glass jars for samples, and a carefully padded box that, it was discovered later, held a microscope. She introduced herself as Anna Clare, a botanist, sent by a Flora Study Society to catalog and analyze the properties of semi-arid plants. Her declared mission was scientific, but a closer look, Michael's trained eye, would catch a shadow of something more, a veiled urgency in her gestures, a subtle restlessness beneath her calm composure. The land seemed to breathe a different air with her arrival, a gentle breeze where before there had only been aridity. Elias, the merchant, quickly integrated into the life of the settlement. He spent his days talking with the settlers, asking about the land, about the water, about the difficulties and hopes. His ability to listen and his apparent empathy soon made him popular. No one questioned his detailed inquiries about the depth of wells or the composition of the soil. After all, he was a merchant interested in selling tools for agriculture, and knowing local conditions was just good business, they thought. Michael, however, kept his guard up. His keen observation, sharpened by years of dealing with disguised lies, detected the way Elias avoided direct eye contact for more than a few seconds, the smile that didn't reach his eyes when he spoke of his past. There was something calculated in his movements, a precision that was out of sync with the spontaneity he tried to project. Elias was like a desert snake, moving silently beneath the sand, waiting for the right moment to strike. Anna Claire, in turn, dedicated herself to her research with a contagious passion. She spent hours under the strong sun, exploring the areas around the settlement, collecting samples, drawing detailed sketches in her notebooks. Initially, the settlers watched her with the same suspicion they reserved for any outsider, but the barrier gave way when the young son of Mrs. Maria, the settlement's seamstress, contracted desert fever, a treacherous illness that often led to quick death. Conventional medicines were scarce, and despair took hold of Mrs. Maria's home. Anna Claire, hearing about the sick boy, went there. With the knowledge she carried, she prepared a poultice from a local herb she had studied, a plant the ancients knew for its fever-reducing properties. She applied the poultice to the boy's chest and prepared a bitter tea. In 2 days, the fever subsided. The boy recovered. Mrs. Maria's gratitude and the news of Anna Claire's deed spread like wildfire on dry powder. The botanist wasn't just a strange outsider who looked at flowers. She was someone who could help. This small victory earned her the community's respect and trust in a way no other gesture could have. Michael observed her from afar during her expeditions. Seeing her lean over a plant, the concentration on her face, the care with which she handled the samples, awakened a dormant curiosity in him. One day he found her near the water source, the settlement's only reliable spring, protected by a small thatched roof. Her canteen was empty under the scorching sun. Without a word, Michael took out his own canteen and offered it to her. There, fingers briefly touched as he passed the object, and the contact was like a small spark in the midst of the aridity. Anna Claire thanked him with a genuine smile, and from that day on, a comfortable silence settled between them. They didn't need many words. He would accompany her from a distance on some of her walks, ensuring her safety against wild animals or other dangers hidden in the monotonous landscape. She, sometimes, would appear at the sheriff's office, curious about a marshal's life, about the stories that land held. While trust in Anna Claire grew, Elias's influence also increased. He began to talk about the possibility of finding more water. Based on his observations, he claimed to have identified signs of a deeper underground vein than the current source. The community, suffocated by the prospect of another prolonged drought announced by the lack of spring rains, clung to this hope tooth and nail. The promise of abundant water meant the salvation of crops, future prosperity, perhaps even the arrival of more families, and the transformation of Dry Gulch into more than just an outpost. The drought arrived with the force of a clenched fist. The wells of several houses began to dry up, the cattle languished under the relentless sun, and the tension in the settlement became palpable. Tempers flared, small disagreements turned into heated arguments. The lack of water was the common enemy, and fear, a parasite feeding on dwindling hope. On a hot, stuffy night, the community gathered in the small chapel under the weak light of oil lamps. Elias, with his convincing oratory, presented his proposal. He would finance the excavation of an artesian well, a complex and expensive undertaking, in exchange for rights to a portion of the land around the new source, should it be found. He argued that the land would increase immensely in value with the water, and that the community would profit from the well's proximity and the sale of their products. Many, desperate, agreed immediately. It seemed the only way out. Faith in providence and in Elias's ability outweighed caution. Michael listened in silence, his gaze shifting from Elias to the anxious faces of his neighbors. There was something about the proposal that didn't fit. Small details in the way Elias talked about the land, a knowledge that seemed to go beyond the interest of a simple tool merchant. He smelled the subtle scent of deception in the stale air, the chapel. He questioned Elias about the estimated depth, about the real cost. about the guarantee that the water would be pure. Elias responded with polished evasiveness, citing risks inherent in any excavation, but the confidence he exuded seemed to appease the doubts of the majority. Michael raised his hand to speak, but was interrupted by an impatient rancher who clamored for action, not questions. The marshal swallowed his words, suspicion fermenting within him. Meanwhile, Anna Claire continued her research. One day, collecting samples near the area where Elias had indicated the possible source, she noticed something strange. The plants in the region, although struggling against the drought, showed an unusual pattern of death, as if they were being poisoned by something coming from below. She analyzed the soil and vegetation samples under her improvised microscope in the boarding house where she was staying. She discovered the presence of a dark mineral in abnormally high concentrations in the soil near the surface. A mineral she recognized from her studies, a mineral with potential industrial value, but which, in contact with water, could make it toxic. Her discovery deeply alarmed her. That night, she met with Michael on the porch of the sheriff's office. The sky was clear, sprinkled with stars that seemed infinite in the desert darkness. The cool air contrasted with the oppressive heat of the day. They sat side by side, spread the rustic map she had drawn on the wooden floor. She pointed to the area, explained her discovery, her voice low and urgent. "Marshal, the plants are dying because of this," she said, touching a spot on the map. Michael leaned in to see better. In a fraction of a second, their hands touched over the paper. The contact was electric, an unexpected jolt for both. They withdrew their hands almost instantly, heat rising to their faces under the weak lamplight. The touch, brief as the flight of a firefly on a starry night, left them uncomfortably aware of each other, of the physical proximity and the connection forming beyond words and concerns about the drought. The dust of the day seemed less suffocating in that shared quietude. The tension reached a first peak of suspense when the next stagecoach arrived. Among the mail for the settlement, there was a sealed letter addressed to Elias. By a delivery error, the letter ended up in the pile of mail for the sheriff's office. Michael, recognizing the unusual seal, hesitated for a moment. His professional ethics dictated that he should not open someone else's mail. But intuition, that silent voice that had guided him for years, screamed danger. The curiosity of a jaguar stalking prey was the only thing that surpassed his respect for privacy. He opened the letter. It was not written in common words, but in a simple numerical substitution code. Michael, with his impeccable memory, remembered seeing a similar pattern years ago, related to illegal mining operations. He spent hours deciphering the message, using old knowledge acquired in past cases. The message confirmed his darkest suspicions. Elias was not a merchant. He was an appraiser. He was there to confirm the existence of a valuable mineral deposit under the settlement and acquire land rights at a low cost. The letter mentioned a mining company, the West Mining Co., and gave instructions to accelerate the land acquisition, taking advantage of the water crisis. Michael's blood ran cold. It wasn't water Elias was after. It was the ore, and the community was about to hand over their lands for a false promise of salvation. He knew he had to act, but he couldn't expose everything at once. Premature revelation that he had intercepted the letter could alert Elias and make him flee before Michael could gather enough evidence or effectively warn the community. It was a small victory, the confirmation of the fraud, but with a potentially high cost. If the timing wasn't perfect, he needed to find a way to use this information without revealing its source. The well excavation began days later, with the community working with a mix of renewed hope and the anxiety that still hung in the air. Elias supervised the work with calculated enthusiasm, while Michael watched, looking for signs of his true purpose. Days turned into weeks. During this period, the routine between Michael and Anna Claire deepened. He accompanied her on her morning expeditions, and while she collected samples and studied the flora, he scanned the horizon with his eagle eyes, ensuring she was safe. They talked about the plants, about the resilience of life in the desert. She taught him to recognize the properties of some herbs, and he, in turn, shared stories of life on the frontier, of the constant danger, of the wild and cruel beauty of the landscape. In the afternoons, Anna Claire often spent time at the sheriff's office, organizing her notes. The silence between them was one of complicity, filled by the slight scratching of the pen on paper and the distant sound of the wind. They shared impressions about books she had brought with her, discussing ideas that seemed distant from the brutal daily life of Dry Gulch. Slowly, they began to share fragments of their lives, small windows, into the past that both tried to leave behind. One afternoon, a dust storm formed on the horizon, forcing everyone to seek shelter. The sand beat against the wooden walls of the sheriff's office. The wind howled like a hungry wolf. Sitting on the porch, waiting for the storm to pass, vulnerability settled in the air. Anna Claire, looking at the maelstrom outside, confessed that her coming to the West wasn't just for science. It was an escape. She was promised to an influential man, a powerful industrialist with whom her family, in financial difficulties, had arranged a marriage of convenience. The idea of a life without passion, trapped with a man who saw her only as a commodity to be acquired, suffocated her. She fled using the botanical expedition as a pretext, hoping to find a way to support herself and escape that fate. The words came out of her like a heavy sigh. Michael listened in silence, understanding in his eyes. When the storm subsided, he went to his small garden and returned with a small clay pot. Inside, a flowering cactus, a rare species he cultivated with care, its yellow petals shining in the weak light of late afternoon. He handed it to her. "Some things," he said, his voice hoarse, "bloom in the most difficult conditions." The gesture, loaded with symbolism, was more eloquent than any declaration. The cactus was the faith that survives in aridity, the hope that springs from the impossible. The excavation continued, the community's hope growing with every foot of earth removed. Finally, a cry of excitement echoed through the worksite. They had found water. The news spread quickly. The community rushed to see, joy stamped on their tired faces. But the celebration was short-lived. The water that emerged was not clear and crystalline as they had hoped. It was dark, murky, with a strange odor. And soon the small source dwindled, barely producing enough to quench the thirst for a few buckets. Disillusionment fell upon Dry Gulch with the force of a dead weight, and worse, the water seemed contaminated. Anna Claire, with her tools and knowledge, analyzed the dark water. She confirmed her suspicions. It was laden with the same mineral she had found in the soil. The water vein that Elias had promised was, in fact, the top of a mineral deposit, and the little water present there was poisoned by the high concentration of the material. The discovery of the contamination turned disappointment into anger. The community turned against Elias. They accused him of being a charlatan, a liar. Elias, seeing the situation crumble, disappeared in the dead of night, taking with him not only his belongings, but also the documents that many of the settlers had signed, transferring rights to their land if water was found. Documents that now seemed fraudulent, based on a false premise. Michael, using his knowledge of the terrain and following subtle clues left by Elias, a different footprint in the damp earth near the source, a casual conversation with Joseph about a rented horse, set off in pursuit. He knew Elias was just a pawn in a bigger game, but capturing him could reveal the extent of the plan. His pursuit led him outside the settlement limits, following a trail that went north. Tension was in the air, thick as suspended dust. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the silence of the desert was broken only by the sound of his horse's hooves on the sand. He felt time was running out, that something more was coming. The intuition of a hunting animal, sharpened by years of danger, drove him on. While Michael was away, his premonition was confirmed in the cruelest way. In the marshal's absence, a group of armed men, with the air of those who didn't accept arguments, arrived in Dry Gulch. They weren't common drifters or bandits. They were well-dressed, their horses were purebred, and they carried modern rifles. They were men from the West Mining Co., the company mentioned in Elias's letter. Led by a man with a cold demeanor and an authoritative voice, they presented legal documents, the same ones Elias had obtained from the settlers, claiming mining rights over the settlement's land. They alleged that, according to territorial law and the signed documents, the land where the mineral was found, and a vast area around it, now belonged to the company for extraction purposes. Panic set in. The community, without Michael's strong leadership, was divided. Some wanted to resist by force, others, intimidated by the weapons and the documents, considered accepting a meager compensation to leave their homes and lands. The climax of imminent danger arrived when the company men identified Anna Claire. The group's leader stared at her with a look of grim recognition. "The fugitive lady," he said, a cruel smile on his lips. He was the representative of the man to whom she was promised in marriage. Her presence there wasn't just an escape. Now, it was a direct obstacle to the company's plans, which needed to keep its operation discreet and away from scandals with influential families. Anna Claire was kept under surveillance, confined to the house where she was staying. She realized the danger not only to herself, but to the entire settlement. The company's crest on the documents and the men's belt buckles was the same as her intended's family. The conspiracy was vaster and crueler than she had imagined. While confined, Anna Claire thought desperately about how to alert Michael. He remembered their conversations about plants and their meanings, about how ancient peoples used nature to communicate. She had an idea. She used the medicinal plants she cultivated on her windowsill, arranging them in a specific sequence, a visual code based on their healing properties and the language of flowers they had discussed. She left the arrangement visible, hoping that Michael, upon his return, would notice it and decipher the message: danger, company, mineral, confined. It was an act of faith, a silent message sent across the desert, a small light against the darkness that was setting in. Michael returned to the settlement at dusk, his horse tired, his spirit heavy. He hadn't found Elias, only traces of his hasty escape. The scene awaiting him was worse than he feared. The armed company men occupied the main street, their faces hard under the twilight. He felt the tension in the air like barbed wire. He looked for Anna Claire. He didn't see her anywhere. He approached the sheriff's office where some settlers were gathered, their faces pale and frightened. He learned of the men's arrival, the land claim, Anna Claire's confinement. The company leader, a man named Colonel Smith, approached Michael with a sarcastic smile. "Marshal, it seems we reached an agreement without your presence. The land is ours now." Michael felt rage rise, hot and dangerous, but he kept his calm, his blue eyes cold as ice. He saw the plant arrangement on the windowsill of Anna Claire's house: sage for healing, rosemary for remembrance, rue for protection, arranged in a specific order that only they would understand. The message came through clear. It was the mining company. The goal was the mineral, and Anna Claire was in danger. Night fell, dark and moonless. The dust of oppression seemed heavier than the desert dust. The company men mounted guard. Michael knew he couldn't confront them head-on. They were outnumbered and better armed. He needed a plan. He gathered the most loyal settlers in the dark chapel, the little light from a single lamp casting ghostly shadows on the walls. He shared Anna Claire's message, the confirmation of the true plan. It's not about water, it's about the mineral, and they will poison the land to get it. Indignation flared in the eyes of some. Others were still paralyzed by fear. Bisait proposed an audacious plan, one that depended on the knowledge of both of them. They would use the old Native American trails he knew well, paths hidden in the rock formations and canyons, to approach the house where Anna Claire was confined without being detected. The mission was to rescue Anna Claire and recover the fraudulent documents in Colonel Smith's possession, proving the fraud and giving them a basis to contest the company's claim. The nighttime operation began under the veil of darkness. Michael and a small group of trusted settlers moving like shadows followed the winding trails, bypassing the company men's guard posts. The silence was broken only by the distant sound of the wind. Suspense was palpable with every step. They reached the vicinity of the house using the terrain's topography for cover. Michael approached Anna Claire's window, the same one where he had seen the plant arrangement. He tapped gently. Anna Claire cautiously opened the window, her green eyes shining in the dark. The relief on her face was a ray of light in the night. The rescue was tense. There was a guard outside, but they managed to neutralize him silently. They entered the house. Colonel Smith and some of his men were sleeping heavily, drugged by the tea Anna Claire had prepared for them, using an herb she knew induced deep sleep. But there was another guard, hidden in the shadow of the hallway, whom they hadn't anticipated. Just as Michael and Anna Claire were grabbing the briefcase with the documents, the guard moved. A rifle was raised in the darkness, in the cold. Crucial instant. Anna Claire, her senses sharpened by danger and her knowledge of her surroundings, saw the movement in the gloom. In a quick reflex, more instinctive than thought out, she threw a small clay pot, which was on a nearby table, in the direction of the guard, shouting a warning. The pot shattered. The distraction was enough for Michael to draw his weapon and neutralize the man before he could fire. It was a moment of mutual vulnerability, of dependence, an act of sacrifice that solidified the bond between them in a way nothing else could have done. Michael's life was in her hands, and she acted without hesitation. The faith they placed in each other was a stronger shield than any weapon. With the company men tied up at the sheriff's office and the documents in hand, Michael called an emergency meeting for dawn. The community gathered in the chapel again, their faces tense, hope flickering between fear and the promise of justice. Michael presented the documents, explained the fraud, but it was Anna Claire who brought true clarity and the possibility of a future. Standing before the community, with the documents in one hand and a sample of the mineral in the other, she explained, with the clarity of her science, what would happen if the West Mining Co. exploited the land. This mineral, she said, is valuable, yes, but the way they plan to extract it involves the use of chemicals and processes that will irreversibly contaminate the groundwater. Not just the source here, but the entire region. In a few years, this land will become a toxic desert, incapable of sustaining life. The water we drink, the land we cultivate, everything will be poisoned. Her words, supported by irrefutable scientific evidence, hit everyone like a blow. The fear of the dark future of slow poisoning outweighed the allure of immediate wealth. But the community was still divided on how to act. Fighting a powerful company seemed impossible. Accepting defeat, unthinkable. The decisive moment came when Joseph, the old saloon owner, a man respected for his age and quiet wisdom, stood up. His voice was hoarse but firm. "My parents used to tell me stories," he said. "Stories of our ancestors before we came here. They lived in a land rich in dark stones, as they called them. At first, they brought prosperity. But then, those who drank the water near the excavations began to get sick. A sickness that weakened, that slowly took life. They said these people joined the stars prematurely. Our ancestors, seeing this, chose life over wealth. They left their lands, sought a place where the water was pure. That's how we came to Dry Gulch. This land may be hard, but the water until now has sustained us. We cannot make the same mistake as those who came before us." Joseph's story, an echo of the past that resonated with Anna Claire's science, touched the community's soul. The choice between life and death, between faith in the land and destructive ambition, became clear. Anna Claire, with her vision for the future, proposed an alternative. Using her connections with naturalists and distant universities, she suggested transforming the region into a botanical study reserve. This would bring legal protection to the land, prevent mining, and still attract resources and scientific attention, offering a new form of sustenance for the community through ecological tourism and research. Michael complimented the proposal, offering to use his old connections with territorial officials and contacts in other towns to ensure the proposal was formalized and recognized by the competent authorities. It was a bold plan, one that would require time and effort, but which offered real hope, a light at the end of the dust tunnel. The decision was made. The community of Dry Gulch, united by the common threat and the vision of a sustainable future, decided to fight for their land the way they could, through law and science instead of violence. News of the decision and the arrest of the company men spread. It would take time for the Botanical Reserve proposal to be approved, for the documents to be legally contested, but the first and most important battle had been won. The battle for the soul and future of the settlement. When the dust finally settled, not just the dust raised by the stagecoach or the storm, but the dust of uncertainty and fear, an unexpected rain fell upon Dry Gulch. It wasn't a downpour, but a fine, steady drizzle that seemed to wash the earth and purify the air, a gentle blessing that seemed to celebrate the collective decision. Michael and Anna Claire met at the highest point of the settlement, a small rocky hill from where the entire valley could be seen. The rain fell softly upon them. The silence between them was no longer one of caution or awkwardness, but of deep understanding and mutual respect. They looked together at the valley they had helped save, at the lands that would not be poisoned, at the future that was opening up. Without words, their hands met, fingers intertwined. The touch was not electric as the first time, but firm, comforting, a silent promise. That simple gesture communicated more than 1,000 words about the path they would choose to follow. Anna. Claire, with a smile that made her green eyes shine like emeralds washed by the rain, took out her notebook. She opened it to a page where, carefully wrapped in moist cotton, a small seed had germinated. It was a cactus seed, a descendant of the one Michael had given her, now sprouting with new life. She handed it to him. "It seems some things really do bloom in the most difficult conditions," she said, repeating his words. He took the germinated seed in his calloused hand, feeling the fragility of the new life and the strength of the hope it represented. The seed was the symbol of what they could cultivate together, of a future they would build on that difficult but precious land. The settlement, renewed by the overcome conflict and the promise of protection for their lands, began a celebration that mixed the traditions of its diverse inhabitants. There was music played on banjo and harmonica, impromptu dances in the street, wet by the gentle rain. Around the central bonfire, lit despite the drizzle, stories were shared. The story of how the botanist cured the boy, the marshal's cunning in uncovering the fraud, the wisdom of old Joseph. Promises were made, not just to rebuild what had been shaken, but to build something new. A new community code began to form, one based on mutual protection, on valuing the land and its natural resources, and on faith in the ability to overcome adversity together. The light of the bonfires reflected in the faces, no longer marked by fear, but by the hope that had bloomed like that small cactus seed. Michael, watching the scene beside Anna Claire, felt the weight of the guilt he had carried for years dissipate, not completely, but enough to breathe lighter. He couldn't change the past, couldn't recover the time lost with his brother, but perhaps in Dry Gulch he could find a new purpose, a new family, a place for hope to flourish. The warmth of Anna Claire's hand in his, the smell of wet earth and wood smoke, the sound of laughter and music, all of it was real, present, the life he was choosing to defend, the life he was choosing to live. The solitude that had accompanied him for so long retreated before the light she brought. He, the solitary marshal, the animal of reclusive habits, began to feel the strength of the pack, the promise of a home. Anna Claire, the fugitive botanist, the rare flower in the desert, found in Dry Gulch not just plants to study, but roots to plant, a love to cultivate. The journey through the arid desert had led them to an unexpected oasis, not of water, but of faith, light, and hope, where their destinies, once separate trails in the dust, crossed to form a single path toward the horizon. And you, at what moment will you let hope bloom in your desert?